On the morning of March 29, 1889, in a small coastal hamlet in southern Sweden, a farmhand made a discovery that would shake the entire nation. Lying in a shallow ditch beside a narrow country road, covered hastily with branches and dirt, was the body of a young woman. Her throat had been cut so deeply that her head was nearly severed. Her clothing had been torn open, and her pockets turned inside out. The victim's name was Hanna Johansdotter. She was 21 years old. She had been walking home from a neighboring farm the night before. Within days, 2 people will be arrested for her murder, a mother and her son. What made this case extraordinary wasn't just the brutality of the crime. It was that the son, Per Nilsson, was only 18 years old, intellectually disabled, and, according to many who knew him, incapable of planning such an act alone. And his mother, Hanna Johansdotter, was a respected churchgoer, a widow, a woman known in the village for her piety and hard work. The question that would haunt Sweden for more than a century was this: did a mother really help her son commit murder? Or did the justice system need someone to blame so badly that it destroyed 2 lives to close one case? Before we proceed further, let me mention here that in 1841, the Swedish justice system was transitioning from its early modern roots into a more modern penal approach. It was a period of severe punishments for minor crimes, reliance on medieval legislation, the law of 1734, and early debates on prison reform. And here's the detail that makes this case unforgettable. Hanna Johansdotter would become the last woman ever executed in Sweden. Her son would be spared the death penalty because of his mental state. But she, the mother, would die by guillotine. To understand how it got there, we have to go back to a world most of us can barely imagine. If you've never heard of Yngsjö, you're not alone. Even today, it's barely a village, a scattering of farms along the coast of Skåne, Sweden's southernmost province, facing Denmark across a narrow channel of cold Baltic water. In 1889, this part of Sweden was rural, isolated, and poor. Most people worked the land. Winters were harsh. Opportunities were few. The church was the center of social life, and reputation was everything. Sweden was still a monarchy, but it was modernizing. Trains were spreading. Newspapers were reaching even small towns. And the legal system, though still rooted in old traditions, was beginning to adopt newer forensic ideas from the rest of Europe. But in places like Yngsjö, old patterns ran deep. Family loyalty, silence about shame, and a belief that some people, those born different or damaged, were marked by God or fate. This is the world Hanna Johansdotter lived in. Hanna was 21. She worked as a maid at a local farm. By all accounts, she was cheerful, hardworking, well-liked. She had no known enemies. She wasn't wealthy, but she wasn't destitute either. She was, in every sense, an ordinary young woman trying to make her way in a hard world. On the evening of March 28th, she left the farm where she worked to walk home to her family's cottage. It was a journey of about 2 kilometers along a rural road. She had made the walk hundreds of times. She never arrived. Now, let's talk about the 2 people who would be accused of taking her life. Per Nilsson was 18 years old. He lived with his mother, Hanna Johansdotter, in a small cottage on the outskirts of Yngsjö. Per had what people at the time called simple-mindedness, what we would now recognize as an intellectual disability. He had difficulty speaking clearly, struggled with tasks that required planning, and was emotionally volatile. Some neighbors described him as childlike. Others said he could be aggressive when frustrated. But no one, before this case, had ever accused him of serious violence. His mother, Anna, was 44. She had been widowed young and had raised Per alone. She was known as a devout Lutheran, a woman who attended church faithfully and kept to herself. Neighbors described her as strict, protective of her son, and intensely private. She worked hard to keep their small household going, and she was, by all appearances, respectable. But there were whispers. Some said Anna was too controlling of Per, that she kept him isolated, that she treated him more like a possession than a son. Others said Per had recently become more difficult to manage, that he had been seen wandering at odd hours, that he had made inappropriate comments to women in the village. But whispers are not evidence. And in March of 1889, no one suspected either Anna or Per of anything criminal. Until the morning of March 29th, when a farmhand found Hanna Johansdotter's body in that ditch, the entire village was thrown into shock. This wasn't a place where murders happened. In a community this small, everyone knew everyone. And that made the crime even more terrifying, because it meant the killer was someone they knew. Within hours, the local sheriff began asking questions. And those questions led, almost immediately, to Per Nilsson and his mother.
Here's why.
On the night Hanna disappeared, several people reported seeing a young man matching Per's description walking along the same road Hanna would have taken. One witness said they heard shouting. Another said they saw someone running into the woods. When the sheriff went to question Anna and Per, he noticed something strange. Per's clothes were muddy. There were scratches on his hands. And when asked where he had been the night before, he became agitated and gave contradictory answers. Anna, by contrast, was calm. Too calm, some thought. She said Per had been home all evening. She said he had been with her. But her story didn't match what the witnesses were saying. And then, during a search of their cottage, investigators found something that would seal their fate. A small amount of money, coins, hidden in a wooden chest. Hanna Johansdotter had been carrying money that night. Her family confirmed it. And now, less than 24 hours after her death, that money seemed to have appeared in Anna Månsdotter's home. On April 2nd, 1889, just 4 days after Hanna's murder, both Anna and Per were arrested. And that's when the real nightmare began. Let's walk through the night of March 28th, 1889, step by step. Hanna Johansdotter left the farm where she worked at around 8 p.m. It was still light. Spring evenings in southern Sweden stay bright well into the evening. She was carrying a small cloth bag with a few personal items and some money she had earned. The walk home was straightforward. A dirt road that wound through fields and patches of forest. Quiet, isolated, but familiar. Somewhere along that road, Hanna encountered someone. We don't know exactly where or when, but we know what happened next. According to the autopsy performed by the local doctor, Hanna was attacked from behind. She was struck on the head with a blunt object, likely a rock or a heavy stick. The blow was hard enough to fracture her skull, but not immediately fatal. She fell to the ground, and then her attacker cut her throat. The wound was deep and violent. The doctor noted that it would have required significant force, and that the weapon used was likely a knife with a blade at least 10 centimeters long. Hanna's clothing was disturbed. Her bodice was torn open. Investigators initially suspected sexual assault, but the autopsy found no evidence of that. Instead, it appeared the clothing had been searched, pockets turned out, her bag rifled through. The motive, it seemed, was robbery. After the attack, the killer dragged Hanna's body a short distance off the road and covered it with branches and dirt. It was a hasty concealment, not a burial. Whoever did this wanted to hide the body long enough to escape, but didn't have the time or the tools to bury it properly. Then they fled. By the next morning, Hanna's family had reported her missing. A search party was organized, and within hours, A farmhand walking along the road noticed the disturbed earth and branches. He pulled them aside and found Hanna. The discovery sent shockwaves through Yngsjö, but it also triggered something else: the immediate pressure to find whoever had done this. Because in a village this small, with this little crime, the presence of a murderer was unbearable. People needed answers. Fast. And the authorities were more than willing to provide them. At this stage, if you were an investigator in 1889 Sweden, here's what you'd be working with. No fingerprint analysis. No DNA. No forensic databases. What you had was witness statements, physical evidence you could see with your eyes, autopsy findings, and confessions if you could get them. The case against Per Nilsson and Hanna Månsdotter was built almost entirely on circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. But here's the critical question, the one that makes this case so haunting. Was the evidence actually strong, or was it just convenient? Because what happened next would reveal just how fragile the line between justice and expedience really was. When Per Nilsson and his mother were arrested on April 2nd, the local authorities believed they had solved the case quickly and cleanly. But the investigation that followed was anything but clean. Let's start with the evidence. The coins. The most damning piece of physical evidence was the money found in Hanna Månsdotter's cottage. Hanna's family confirmed she had been carrying a small amount of money, a few coins, earnings from her work. After her murder, that money was missing. When investigators searched Hanna's home, they found coins hidden in a wooden chest. The prosecution would argue this was Hanna's money, that it proved robbery was the motive, that it directly linked Hanna and Per to the crime. But here's the problem. The coins were generic. There was no way to prove they were the same coins Hanna had been carrying. Hanna claimed the money was hers, saved over time from selling eggs and doing small jobs. The prosecution said this was a lie, but they had no forensic way to prove it. The witnesses. Several villagers reported seeing a young man near the crime scene on the night of the murder. Some said the man looked like Per Nilsson. Others weren't sure. One witness, a farmer, said he heard shouting and saw someone running into the woods. But he didn't see the person's face. He couldn't say for certain it was Per. Another witness, a woman, said she saw Per walking along the road earlier that evening. But her timeline was vague. She couldn't pinpoint the exact time. These were the kinds of witness statements that, in a modern court, would be considered weak, vague, uncertain, influenced by the fact that everyone in the village already knew Per had been arrested. But in 1889, with no other leads, they were treated as near conclusive. The scratches and mud. When the sheriff first questioned Per, he noted scratches on Per's hands and mud on his clothes. This seemed significant. It suggested Per had been in a physical struggle, possibly in the woods. But Per was known to wander. He often came home dirty. The scratches could have come from brambles, from working around the cottage, from any number of mundane activities. Again, suspicious, but not proof. The interrogations. This is where the case gets darker. Per Nilsson was interrogated multiple times over the course of several days. And each time, his story changed. At first, he denied being anywhere near the crime scene. Then, under pressure, he admitted he had been walking on the road that night. Then he said he had seen Hanna. Then he said he had attacked her. By April 5th, Per had confessed. But the confession was deeply problematic. Per was intellectually disabled. He was 18, frightened, and being questioned by authority figures in a system that didn't recognize the concept of mental competency the way we do now. There was no lawyer present, no recording, no safeguards, and his confession was inconsistent. He gave different versions of how the attack happened. He couldn't explain key details, like what weapon he used or where he had hidden it. At times, his answers seemed coached or simply designed to make the interrogators stop pressing him. To a modern observer, this confession looks coerced. But in 1889, it was enough. Now here's the twist. Hanna Johansdotter never confessed. From the moment of her arrest until the moment of her execution, Hanna maintained her innocence. She said she had nothing to do with Hanna's death. She said Per had been home with her that evening. She said the money was hers. And yet, the prosecution built a theory that placed her at the center of the crime. The prosecution's theory. The state argued that Hanna had orchestrated the murder. According to their narrative, Hanna needed money. She knew Hanna would be walking home that night with cash. She sent her son, Per, out to rob and kill Hanna, knowing that Per, because of his disability, would be easily manipulated. The prosecution painted Hanna as a cold, calculating woman who used her son as a weapon. But there was no direct evidence of this. No witness saw Hanna near the crime scene. No one heard her give Per instructions. The entire theory rested on the presence of the coins, Per's inconsistent confession, and the belief that Per, on his own, wasn't capable of planning such an act. That last point is crucial. The very thing that was used to argue Per shouldn't face the death penalty, his intellectual disability, was also used to argue that someone else must have been pulling the strings. And the only person close enough to do that was his mother. The defense's counterargument. Hanna's defense attorney argued that the evidence was thin, circumstantial, and that the confession from Per was unreliable. He pointed out that no murder weapon had been found, that the identification by witnesses was uncertain, that the coins could not be definitively linked to Hanna. He argued that Hanna was being convicted not on evidence, but on suspicion and prejudice. But the court was unmoved. In rural Sweden in 1889, a mother's influence over a disabled son was seen as absolute. If Per had committed murder, many believed, it was because Hanna had willed it. The trial took place in the Kristianstad court, essentially a regional criminal court that handled serious felonies. It lasted several days. Dozens of witnesses testified. The community was gripped. And on May 15, 1889, the verdict was delivered. Per Nilsson, guilty of murder. Sentenced to life in a prison for the criminally insane. Hanna Johansdotter, guilty of murder. Sentenced to death. And now, the entire case would hinge on one final question. Would the Swedish king commute her sentence, or let it stand? Let us step back from the courtroom and try to understand the people at the center of this case. Not to excuse, not to defend, but to see clearly. By all accounts, Per was a young man trapped between two worlds. He had the physical body of an adult, but the cognitive and emotional development of a much younger child. He struggled to express himself. He was easily confused, easily led. In psychological terms, Per likely had what we would now recognize as a moderate intellectual disability, possibly combined with other developmental issues. He would have had difficulty understanding cause and effect, planning ahead, or controlling impulses. Could he have committed the murder alone? Possibly. If he encountered Hanna on the road, if she resisted an attempt to rob her, if he panicked, yes, it's plausible that he could have struck out violently. But could he have planned it? That's far less certain. The crime, while brutal, didn't show signs of sophisticated planning. It was impulsive, chaotic. The concealment of the body was hasty and ineffective. From a psychological standpoint, this looks more like a panicked attack than a premeditated murder. And yet, the prosecution insisted there had to be a guiding hand behind it. Why? because acknowledging that someone like her could commit such violence alone was too frightening. It suggested randomness, chaos, a world where terrible things happened without reason or control. It was easier to believe that someone, his mother, had made it happen. Anna is the figure at the heart of this case's enduring mystery. Was she a manipulative woman who used her son as a tool for murder? Or was she a grieving mother, convicted on prejudice and circumstantial evidence, who died for a crime she didn't commit? Here's what we know about her. Anna was a widow who had raised her alone in difficult circumstances. She was described as strict, private, and deeply religious. Some neighbors found her cold. Others said she was simply reserved. She had no history of violence, no prior criminal record, no known financial desperation. But she did have something that made her vulnerable in the eyes of the law: control over her son. In 19th century Sweden, the idea of maternal influence was powerful. Mothers were seen as moral guardians. If a mother was good, her children would be good. If a mother was corrupt, her children would be corrupt. Anna's perceived coldness, her lack of visible emotion during the trial, worked against her. People expected a mother to weep, to plead, to break down. Anna did none of those things. She maintained her innocence calmly and firmly. To some, this looked like strength. To others, it looked like guilt. Now, let's consider the authorities. The local sheriff and the prosecutors were under immense pressure. A young woman had been brutally murdered. The community was terrified. There was an expectation of swift justice. When Nilsson emerged as a suspect, someone already seen as other, as unpredictable, it was easy to lock onto him. And when his story didn't add up, when he seemed incapable of acting alone, the next logical step, in their minds, was to look at who controlled him. This is a cognitive bias we see over and over in criminal investigations. The need for the narrative to make sense. Per alone didn't make sense. Per plus Anna did. Whether it was true was almost secondary. In Yngsjö, the case split opinion. Some believed the verdict was just. They saw Anna as a manipulative woman who had sent her son to do her dirty work. Others believed she was innocent. They saw a woman being punished for her son's crime simply because the authorities needed someone to blame. But there was another layer, too. Anna's execution would serve a symbolic function. It would reassure the community that the moral order had been restored, that evil had been punished, that mothers who failed in their duty would be held accountable. In this sense, Anna's trial was never just about evidence. It was about what society needed to believe. After the verdict, Hanna Johansdotter's case went through the standard appeals process in Sweden. Her defense attorney petitioned for a commutation of the death sentence, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial and that executing a woman, especially in a case with such uncertain proof, would be a miscarriage of justice. The appeal went all the way to King Oscar II of Sweden, who had the power to grant clemency. On August 7, 1890, the king's decision was announced. The death sentence would stand. Hanna Johansdotter would be executed. On August 7, 1890, in the town of Kristianstad, Anna was led to the guillotine. Sweden had only recently adopted the guillotine as its method of execution, influenced by practices in France. It was considered more humane than hanging. Anna walked to the platform calmly. Witnesses reported that she showed no emotion. She did not weep. She did not plead. She knelt. The blade fell. Hanna Johansdotter became the last woman ever executed in Sweden. Her son, Nilsson, was sent to a facility for the criminally insane, where he would spend the rest of his life. He died in 1918 at the age of 47, having never been released. In the months following Anna's execution, the case faded from the headlines. For the authorities, it was closed. Justice, they believed, had been served. But in Yngsjö, the story lingered. Some families refused to speak about it. Others passed down conflicting versions, some insisting Anna was guilty, others convinced she had been wrongfully killed. Hanna Johansdotter's family received no compensation, no closure beyond the verdict. They buried her in the local churchyard, where her grave can still be found today. The Yngsjö murder case had a lasting impact on Swedish legal history, though not in the way one might expect. Hanna Månsdotter's execution became a rallying point for opponents of capital punishment in Sweden. Activists pointed to her case as an example of how the death penalty could be applied unevenly, influenced by gender, class, and public pressure rather than clear evidence. In 1910, just 20 years after Anna's death, Sweden effectively abolished the death penalty for most crimes. The last execution of any kind in Sweden took place in 1910. By 1921, the death penalty was formally removed from Swedish law entirely. Anna's case is often cited in discussions about abolition, not because her guilt or innocence was ever definitively proven, but because her execution highlighted the irreversible nature of capital punishment and the dangers of convicting on circumstantial evidence. In the decades since, historians, criminologists, and legal scholars have revisited the Yngsjö case multiple times. Some argue that Anna was almost certainly innocent, that she was convicted on prejudice, that her son's confession was coerced, and that the evidence would never hold up in a modern court. Others believe that while the evidence was weak, it's impossible to know for certain what happened. They point out that we cannot fully reconstruct the dynamics between Anna and Per, or what may have been said or done in private. What nearly everyone agrees on is this: the trial was flawed, the investigation was rushed, and the execution of Hanna Månsdotter, whether she was guilty or not, was a failure of justice. So, after all this, after the investigation, the trial, the execution, what are we left with? We are left with a case that asks more questions than it answers. Did Per Nilsson kill Hanna Johansdotter? Quite possibly. His proximity to the scene, his inconsistent statements, and the lack of any other strong suspect suggest he was involved. But did Hanna Månsdotter plan or order the murder? That is far less certain. The case against her rested almost entirely on the assumption that Per couldn't have acted alone. But that assumption was based on prejudice, not evidence. It was based on the idea that someone like Per needed a master. And so Anna was executed not because of what she did, but because of who she was, a mother who failed to perform grief the way society expected, a woman who remained calm when she should have wept, a person who didn't fit the narrative. If you're interested in global true crime told with depth and respect, subscribe to Enter the Crime and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Hanna Månsdotter was guilty? Or was this a tragic miscarriage of justice? Your comment on the controversial trial and execution method are welcome.